Welcome, Unity Minister Reverend Rhonda. Welcome along to Unity of Melbourne, Rhonda.
Thank you, Bill. And hello, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces down there after all these years. In fact, you might be surprised to hear that it's 17 and a half years since I left Unity of Melbourne and came back to Unity Brisbane. But I'd just like to update you. Some of you may know, some of you may not, about some major changes that are happening in Unity of Brisbane. We have a new minister, the Reverend Julian Harvey, and I resigned from that position as at the end of last year. And although I'll still be there to support Julian in any way that he requests, I'm feeling very much like a free spirit. I'm very much like to go off and dance and tour a bit and see a bit more, particularly of Australia and of this part of the world. I will be still doing some talks, though, so I won't disappear altogether. You know, when we think of the founders of Unity, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, there's a tendency to think of Charles as being the thinker, the brains, the one who put it all together, and Myrtle just being there somewhere in the background writing letters to people. But in actual fact, Myrtle was really the heart of Unity. And I mean that in the sense of, the heart is the first part of a baby that's formed. And Myrtle was definitely the founder of Unity. And I'm going to share a little bit of what she wrote about that herself. But it's really important to remember that we're all thinkers and feelers. We're all thoughts and feelings. We're all male and female. And so were Charles and Fillmore. They were both very loving people. They both had a great sense of fun. And they both were the thinkers who came up with this new thought, this new idea that has continued through so many years of unity in so many parts of the world. So I came across the title Myrtle, Heart of Unity, instead of the usual Mother of Unity. And I thought that's so appropriate. Myrtle was the heart in the sense of the center, the foundation, the very beating heart of Unity. She was also the heart of Unity in her demonstration of love, the hundreds of letters she personally wrote to those asking for prayer support. She wrote with love, balanced with very down-to-earth wisdom, basic matters like relationship issues and food for health and how to pray. In time, she needed staff to help with all that correspondence. And the telephone line, because she was getting lots of phone calls as well. And so Silent Unity was born in the late 1880s. I don't want to tell that whole story of Myrtle. It's been documented in so many books, and later on I'll make some suggestions for some of those books. But unless you're very new to Unity, you'll know that Myrtle healed herself of TB, an unknown feat in her time. And in doing so, she came to understand the power of prayer. She understood our oneness with omnipresence and what she called our 12 spiritual gifts, which Charles later changed to 12 powers. And I think the best explanation of those 12 powers is actually in the selection of letters that were published under the title Myrtle Fillmore's Healing Letters. And that's the chapter, Developing Our Faculties. If you read nothing else of that book, it's worth reading that very early idea of those 12 powers, and particularly that chapter, Developing Our Faculties. So let me share a little of her own words, and I personally try to move past the language of an anthropomorphic God, which was still very much part of unity in the early days. However, in how I've put the initials of a book and now I'm going blank on it. How to Let God Help You. She actually wrote the word God and then put in brackets after it spirit or capital M mind. So she was aware too that we needed to move past the word God to put more emphasis on our oneness with that omnipresent, loving, all-knowing spirit. So she wrote in one of her letters where she was explaining the origins of unity, she wrote, "The light of God revealed to us," the thought came to me first, "that life was of God, that we were inseparably one with the source, and that we inherited from the divine and perfect Father." What that revelation did to me at first was not apparent to the senses, but it held my mind above negation, and I began to claim my birthright and to act as though I believed myself the child of God, filled with his life. I gained. Others saw that there was something new in me. They asked me to share it. I did. How about that for a summing up of unity? Continuing with her quote, "Others were healed and began to study. My husband continued his business and at first took little interest in what I was doing. But after a time, he became absorbed in the study of truth too. We consecrated ourselves to the Lord and kept doing daily that which we felt led to do. We began to prosper, a little at a time, and our health continued to improve." Considering that she was writing in the 1880s, how amazing is that? Think how many lives have been impacted by her spiritual understanding and teachings over the last 145 years. Even for people who've never heard of unity, because unity teachings have gone out under so many different titles over the years. So yes, today's daily word on inspiration very much pointed to Myrtle, Bill, I agree. So her teachings are just as relevant today with the challenges we are facing globally. And I'll go on with that quote. "We have a very decided part. We are to cease worrying and being anxious and thinking and speaking of the past and of the apparent lack and idleness. We are to concentrate all our attention upon the truth of God and the truth of our being, upon the very things we would see taking place in our lives. We cannot do this as long as we have negative thoughts in our heart." Myrtle Fillmore's teachings have come down through generations of unity teachers, ministers, authors, and families, including her own. And I'd like to share a couple of my experiences with her, two of her descendants. When I was at ministerial school in the early 90s, I had the privilege of meeting two Fillmore family descendants. First, let me share my memories of the Fillmore granddaughter, Rosemary Fillmore Ray, the daughter of Myrtle and Charles' son, Rickett. Rosemary was everything I could have expected from Myrtle's granddaughter. By the way, Phyllis, you were just after me at ministerial school. Did you get to spend some time with Rosemary? Wasn't she just how you depicted Myrtle would have been? The sweetest lady with a big open heart. She radiated peace and tranquility, balanced by her great sense of humour. She was very interested in Australia, and she had travelled the world meeting world leaders and religious leaders, but she'd never made it to Australia. So she was very interested in Australia and often told me she'd love to visit. That never happened, unfortunately. Rosemary had a beautiful speaking voice and was very involved in the radio side of Unity. And would you believe, read Daily Word on television for many years in America. So how did I get to make such a special friend? She was my escape, my refuge when I needed time out from classes. She had an office on the same floor in the same building and was always glad to see me. She'd say, "Come in and have a coffee with me." She would ask me questions about Australia, and she would share memories of her much loved grandparents. And one story she told me was that as a child, she was very surprised to find out that other children didn't know what she meant by Charles sitting in the silence. She said, "Doesn't everyone's grandfather sit in the silence?" She never once asked me why I was out of class. She just accepted that I needed some time out. Very perceptive lady. Somebody asked her, "What word do you love the sound of?" And she replied, "Peace." The word brings to mind thoughts of tranquility, a feeling of being in unity and harmony with the energy of life. The word peace always reminds me that no matter what I experience, I have a choice of how I react. I can strike out with anger and fear, or I can choose peace. When I choose peace, I not only help myself, but I help make our world a little more peaceful. The other Fillmore descendant I was privileged to meet was the great granddaughter, Connie Fillmore Bazzi. Did you get to meet Connie, Phyllis? In the era when I was there, and that was about halfway through her 20 years as president of Unity, Connie lived in Florida with her husband, which is where the Bazzi bit comes in, but came back to the village regularly for board meetings. Her house was further down the same little road as the student accommodation where Phyllis and I stayed during our time there. And whenever she would find us walking, going to walk down through the lovely trees back to our house, she would always stop and say, "Get in." She wouldn't take no for an answer. And she would grill us with questions about school and our teachers and the whole experience. She was really interested in how the actual ministerial education program was running for us, and she was particularly interested in my answers as an international student. Connie's version of Unity's 5 fundamentals of truth, which we now call 5 precepts or principles, for me is the ultimate foundation statement of what unites Unity globally. It can be found in the booklet Keys to the Kingdom. Now, in more recent times, there's been various versions of those 5 basic principles of Unity, and that would have been a good idea if I'd looked up which particular version you have on your website, but it's possible that you do have the actual original Connie Fillmore version. I know it's been kind of updated and changed a bit on Unity Brisbane, but I'm not sure about Unity of Melbourne. So to quote Connie in that booklet, Keys to the Kingdom, so what is unity? Unity is a family of loved ones drawn together by their mutual belief in an idea. The idea that holds us is that of a good and all-powerful God whose love indwells us and gives us everything we need to lead healthy, happy, productive lives. This idea and the people who believe it have created incredible blessings of positive thought and prayer in our world. I also met Rosemary Fillmore's brother, Charles Jr., who was chairman, or I think, of the Board of Trustees when I was there. Did you get to meet Charles? A very formidable sort of man, I thought at the time, although when I've read about him, by authors like Neil Vahl, that's not the impression one gets. He certainly had a very deep understanding of unity principles. But when I say I met him, that would have been no more than a formal introduction and handshake, because I certainly never connected with him like I was privileged to with Rosemary and Connie. So just tying those words of Connie Fillmore back to Myrtle's philosophy, Myrtle wrote, "The idea that holds us is that of a," oh no, sorry. No, that's still a Connie version I'm reading. So that idea of, an idea whose time has come and that the world needs, that originates with Myrtle's writings. But I like this one, and I did already read it, but I'll read it again from Connie. "The idea that holds us is that of a good and all-powerful God whose love indwells us and gives us everything we need to lead healthy, happy, productive lives." Connie calls it an idea whose time has come, surely needed more than ever in today's world. Today, we might word it differently. An idea that we are expressions of omnipresent divinity with the wisdom and love available within us for us to lead healthy, happy, productive lives. Prayer is what links us to that divine principle, and meditation is what opens our minds to the universal, all-knowing mind that we can tap into for guidance. This guidance will always be for our highest good, and we can be sure that what is for our highest good will be for the highest good of those around us. To put it in Myrtle's words, prayer is an exercise to change our thought habits and our living habits, that we may set up a new and better activity in accord with the divine law, rather than with the suggestions we have received from various sources. Now, I think that little idea of Myrtle's is really worth thinking about, that we have that choice of getting caught up with information from the outer world, from the media, the social media, writings, newspapers, whatever. We're bombarded with information, and it's our choice whether that's what becomes our life philosophy, or whether we turn within for guidance, whether we turn to the truth that is within ourselves. It's easy to fit in with the suggestions from outer sources rather than turn in for what is best. So many times my inner guidance has been different from what I have heard or read, yet it will always turn out to be the right advice. And if there's one thing I learned very early in Unity, it was that the surest way to bring about useless, unnecessary suffering is to ignore your inner guidance. Even when that inner guidance doesn't seem very palatable at the time. It's like it's not what I want to do, but I have found over and over that it's what turns out to be for the best for me and for all around me. Well, I keep referring to different books, and so I sent a list of those books to Wayne and asked him if he would post those in your chat, so that if you want to copy the chat, that you can put it into another document and look some of them up. I think that the good news is that most, and if not all, I'm sure you will find in your Unity of Melbourne library. But, Myrtle Fillmore never actually wrote any books as such. She wrote all those thousands of letters, and those writings have been used to just sort of put together a picture of her wisdom. And so the obvious one is Myrtle Fillmore's Healing Letters, which was edited by Francis Fulks. And as I mentioned before, particularly that chapter, Developing Our Faculties on the 12 Powers, is worth reading. And another book that is taking some of her teachings and putting them into a book as though she wrote it, but it's actually, the editor was Warren Meyer, was How to Let God Help You. And the particular chapter in that book is chapter 6, Fundamental Propositions. I'm sorry, Wayne, has that gone up in the chat? It has, okay, thank you. And then there's books about Myrtle Fillmore or written by other people, like Myrtle Fillmore, Mother of Unity by Thomas Witherspoon. And a more recent one, that I mentioned before and is now going clear out of my head, but whatever the next book is on that list, is a more recent look at the development of the Unity movement. Neil Val is the author, and that's a book well worth reading. And then getting back to Rosemary Fillmore Ray and her travels, and she was the only baby born on what they called Unity Farm before it was Unity Village. And she traveled as an ambassador for Unity all around the world. And she wrote her story, That's Just How My Spirit Travels. So That's Just How My Spirit Travels by Rosemary Fillmore Ray. It's a delightful book. Having taken it off my shelf to look for quotes for this talk, I ended up getting caught up in it, and I'm rereading it. I haven't read it since it first came out, and finding it just a really lovely book to read. Now, as for online, of course, you can go on to unity.org, which is, the Unity headquarters site, and there's all sorts of interesting stuff there. But it's a little harder sometimes to find what you're looking for on that site. An easier site is truthunity.net, which is on the information Wayne put up. So truthunity.net has just about everything you ever wanted to know about Unity. I think it's the best online reference. And that link that I've given you there, truthunity.net, people Myrtle Fillmore, have some really good information about Myrtle Fillmore. Anyway, how are we going for time? Yeah. So I'll let Myrtle have the closing words. When we let light flood us with its sunshine, all clouds vanish and we begin to see ourselves in new ways of doing, which lead to wholeness and health and satisfaction and growth. So I invite you to take that thought into a short time of meditation. So I invite you to let your body be relaxed. Take some breath in and breathe out. Breathe out any stress or tension. Breathe in the peace that Rosemary Fillmore wrote about. The peace. Peace that is within us if we choose to let it reside in our very hearts and minds. A peace that surpasses all understanding. And let these words of Myrtle wash over you. When we let light flood us with its sunshine, all clouds vanish and we begin to see ourselves in new ways of doing, which lead to wholeness and health and satisfaction and growth. Let's take that thought into the quiet of our inner selves. And loving Spirit, we give thanks for the awareness that we can choose peace. We can choose the thoughts and the feelings that bring us in line with your wisdom and your love that floods our whole being with light and with love. We remember that your presence is omnipresent, everywhere present, and therefore within each of us. And we send this awareness out into the world that all people who are facing challenging situations would find that peace within their own hearts and minds. That peace may be settled throughout this planet. We give thanks for the awareness that when we turn within for guidance, what we receive is that which is for our highest good and the highest good of all whose lives touch ours in any way. We would surround with light those loved ones that we hold on our prayer lists. Knowing that your love and your wisdom lead them, guide them, and uplift them. and loving spirits, we take a moment of gratitude to give thanks for all the good that we experience here on this planet Earth. Knowing that your guidance is for us to live our lives fully, joyfully, and with satisfaction in all that we do. We release any anxieties, any concerns about ourselves and our lives, or those of our loved ones. And we know only that good is established. Good is established as peace and wisdom and love. And for this awareness, we are grateful. Amen.